This morning, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie, he has been on a mission to address the food supply and what we have done to it with these mass shutdowns because of coronavirus. He tweeted out this morning, if you're under the impression that the government has fixed problems with the food supply, you've been duped. Expect higher prices, more imported food of questionable origin, and domestic supply disruptions for at least 3 months. Well, here in Iowa, of course, we live in the breadbasket of America's food supply chain. So I wanted to talk to somebody local about this who's actually farming, right? Not that, associations or spokespeople are terrible, but they're getting their information from people like the individual we're about to talk to. So let's just go right to the source about the source. Someone who's on the front lines of America's food supply. His name is Caleb Hamer. He's just a good old-fashioned Iowa farmer, and he joins us here on The Blaze. How are you, Caleb?
Good, Steve. How are you?
I could be a little better, but I could be a lot worse. You know how it is.
You got more freedom on the weekend, it looked like, than I did.
Yeah, so. I did, but that's because I don't have a real job. You had to work over the weekend with our food supply.
And I'm in Blackhawk County, so we can't go to the restaurants yet.
We can't in Polk either, but Story County is just a county away. Todd, you went south to Warren County, just south, right?
I did. It was glorious.
Yes. So no neighboring counties to Blackhawk are free that you can take advantage of?
Grundy is open, I do believe,
okay.
But some of the restaurants are still slowly just doing carryout that I saw.
Okay. For those wondering, our state, 77 of our 99 counties are open. The 22 counties where about 90% of our current coronavirus cases are inhabited, they remained closed until May the 15th. But I felt like the Dukes of Hazzard escaping Boss Hogg and Roscoe to the next county over outside their jurisdiction. I kind of felt like that over the weekend by going to a free county, but we had a ton of fun. All right, so food supply. Let's start with that tweet from Thomas Massie. Based on what you're hearing from other farmers, what you're seeing yourself, do you think it's possible we're looking at a multi-month disruption of the food supply chain?
Well, Steve, I will speak mainly to the meat sector in Iowa. We're feeding hogs and poultry and cattle. I can't say a whole lot about the produce. I don't have a tremendous amount of knowledge about that. But the supply chain from the pork and the beef side is highly disrupted due to the closing of the meat packing plants. There is animals out here. They need to get to slaughter sooner than later before farmers have to start making terrible decisions about having to euthanize animals because they're at market weight and it's expensive to keep these things on feed when they should have been harvested already.
Can you quantify for our audience what that may look like to them in the weeks and months ahead when they either go to a restaurant or they do their grocery shopping, and depending on which way this ultimately goes? Can you kind of quantify, give them, what does that look for them? How's that look for them as a consumer, Caleb?
I would guess, based on boxed beef pricing and some of the other retail level pricing that may continue to rise, that is not getting to the local farmers. I promise you. The packer margins last week on beef and pork, I looked up, they were making almost $800 a head on cattle, and the farmer was recording a $260 loss for every steer sold. Similar type situation in hogs, less dollars involved there, but the packer's making money and the farmer's losing. I think you will continue to see hamburger prices rise and some of the pork cuts rise, and that's just due to these mega plants like Tyson and Waterloo being shut down. And like I said, they're just not able to process the amount of animals they should be processing on a daily basis.
What's your window before danger zone? You said you guys could be approaching a time or a juncture where you have to make some difficult decisions if you don't send these animals off to slaughter. What is that juncture? How far away from it are you?
From the hog side, some of the major producers in the state are at that juncture. I talked to some neighbors at the end of last week. They said they had to a 20-day window before they have to start making terrible decisions. And
so that would be your hams, your bacons, right? Things of that nature.
Yep. And when the restaurant industry got taken away from us, that was a lot of it. Because, I mean, if the bacon's a condiment in the restaurant industry, and that's just not getting sold right now. Loins and chops and some hams are still getting sold, but the bacon market and the belly market has pretty much gone away.
If those animals have to be put down, does that then come with an assumption in a decline of production from there? Or do you maintain current levels of production, assuming that eventually the demand will keep up? I guess what I'm asking is there a further lag after that decision? Meaning, is there an assumption put in, since we had to make this decision with these animals now, then we are foreseeing that there'll be a delay in demand for the foreseeable future, which could lead to a multiple month disruption at that point?
Well, when you look at the meat sector, you have poultry, pork, and beef. And due to the breeding cycle and the amount of time it takes on feed to finish those animals out, it takes weeks to turn the poultry industry around, months to turn the hog industry around, and years to turn the beef industry around. The farmers I talk to haven't, they may have soon or chose to, but the replenish cycle on the hogs has not slowed down, because the futures market is telling them 6, 8, 9 months out, there is still going to be demand for hogs. So they haven't slowed down the replenishment yet. If they choose to do that, it will take months to get it built back up.
So in other words, this could be, it's still conceivable that this could be a one-time blip loss in that market, provided the replenishment levels remain stable. There's still a chance that could be the case, right?
Yes, if these farmers can remain viable long enough to keep farming into that time frame.
What I hear you saying then is we really kind of got to look at what the future markets are telling folks like you, right?
Correct. The hog, I looked a little while ago, hogs were up again today, and they were up at the end of last week, but that's not indicative of what's happening in the cash market at ground level at some of these packers. There's so many hogs that should have been coming to market, and now they're not harvesting at the amounts they should be harvesting. So there's hardly any worth to a hog on today's date, but the futures market is telling us come October, come December, these things should be getting closer to break even again.
Okay. What's the biggest thing you're worried about as a farmer, Caleb? Both you individually, because I want our audience to know what families like yours, operations like yours are looking at right now. But then on a macro level, big picture, what's the big concern that you have?
We need this whole commodity. I mean, we're in the middle of a multiple black swan event. At the beginning of March, we started an oil war when the Saudis started pumping oil like crazy. That tanked the corn market and some of the other grain markets overnight. And then we have this loss of the animal sectors getting hammered, and so the feed use is probably going to go down in the short term. We grow corn and soybeans, and our concern is if we don't get people back on the roads, back in the restaurants, the ethanol demand is down, the feed demand is down. The restaurant industry in itself is a huge thing that we're missing right now, because people aren't going and ordering a steak, they're going home and cooking hamburger. There's a large variance in the value of those cuts to the cattle farmer right now. Similar with pork, as I mentioned earlier about the bacon. So once we get reopened, I would encourage everybody to support your local grocery store and support the local restaurants, and get back to ordering those steaks. Throw some bacon on the baked potato and whatever else you want to get.
Yeah, I've tried having my local steak place deliver me a steak. Is not the same as having it cooked hot right off the grill right there. It's just not the same. It's just not.
No, it's not.
So give us an idea. What is your day looking like right now?
We will finish planting corn today, which is another story because of the tremendous weather we've had. We probably are looking at one of the biggest corn crops this country's ever planted. But now we're also wondering where are we going to go with all that corn if the ethanol industry and the meat sectors don't snap back. So that will be the rest of today. Coming weeks, we'll finish planting soybeans. And then at some point, we're going to get back to shipping corn again to one of the local feed mills.
What's your view of how Governor Reynolds has handled this? Because everybody has their own local concerns, but I have to believe her concern about the food supply chain is one of the reasons why she's been when it came to the shutdowns, one of the most cautious governors in the country. And then when it's come to the reopening, she's become one of the more aggressive. I have to believe some of the information that you have shared with our audience has been a driving force in her trying to take more of a big picture, long-term view to this.
Well, I think she's done tremendous, and she did what she could for as long as she could to protect the supply chain, and then apparently protecting the supply chain didn't matter anymore once we started closing some of these hog slaughter facilities. So I understand that people are getting sick, and we need to figure there has to be a way to get these things open and running and keep people safe at the same time.
The White House put the emergency defense production order. I can't remember exactly what it's called. The legislation from World War II, applied it to the meatpacking plants. Now we're hearing all kinds of stories about positive tests out of these meatpacking plants. We're not hearing a lot of stories about body bags, though, coming out of these meatpacking plants from people dying of the virus at the exact same time. So I would imagine that you were in favor of the White House taking that action. I think it was about a week or so ago.
Yeah, and it's going to help, I hope. But understand, as they close these meatpacking facilities down, they're going in on those assembly lines and installing the plexiglass and the protective equipment. And because of that, we're spacing out the workers on those assembly lines to 6 feet instead of however close they were before. So even when we get these things open and running, those assembly line chains are going to be running slower. And I heard over the weekend, best case scenario would be 80 to 85% capacity once we get reopened.
This is a key thing for, I think, the average American, that all they know about your farm and Caleb is it tastes good. All right, as I used to say. But it's a little bit like oil. You can pump as much of it out of the ground as you want. If you don't have any refineries, it's just sitting in a barrel, right? Similar to you can do whatever you want with your cattle, with your poultry, with your pork. But if there's nowhere to process it into the products, into the products we buy and then consume, whether it's what we buy from a store or at a restaurant, then it's irrelevant at that point. That's what the threat to the supply chain is.
Correct. And people may ask, why would they be euthanizing hogs? Well, you can't just put a hog on a ration where it's not going to gain weight. And there's a certain point where it's not desirable for the food chain if they get to a certain size. And it's actually a more expensive feed ration to put a hog on a zero gain diet than it is a regular feed ration.
Before I let you go, what's the question I didn't ask you? Because I don't know as much about this as you do. So what's the question I didn't ask you that our audience needs to know the answer to?
That we need to know the answer to. 40% of the nation's hog slaughter was gone last week, and we need to start ratcheting that back up, because if that continues at 40%, that 20-day window I talked about might be getting smaller in a hurry.
Well, if you thought Americans were already upset, take their bacon away. All right. And you ain't seen nothing yet. All right. Caleb, thank you so much for doing this. And you guys are swamped right now. So setting this up and your willingness to come on and provide this information to our audience. God bless you, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the work you're doing. Okay.
All right, Steve. Hey, thank you guys. Appreciate it.